Hi, how's it going? This is Resident of Collinwood for YouTube, back to give my review of episode 31 of Dark Shadows, narrated by Alexander Mulkey Isles, written by Art Wallace, directed by John Sedgwick. This episode asks a very interesting question. It asks more than one. The questions to me it most asks is, we know who Burke is from a standpoint of where he's from, but it also re-asks that question. Who is Burke really? Other than a native of Collinsport, former friend of Roger Collins, that we all know. We know he went to prison. We know he served 5 years out of a 10-year sentence. We know he's secretly searching for the truth of why was he sent to prison and who wrongfully sent him to prison. As he put it in an episode ago, he was railroaded. But I think what 31 does a really good job is taking the character and asking a completely different question of who is he. What I mean by that is when he pulls out the bleeder valve and says, "Oh, you've been looking for this," and he says where he found it. He found it along the road where the accident was. Because he found David wandering the road, you know. He also tells Rod, because what Roger learns in this episode is that David was in Burke's room, and when Roger confronts uh, Burke with it, he goes, "Oh," he goes, "That's right, Burke." You also see David is very mad at Victoria in this episode. He tells Burke that he's going to get even with her. He's going to get even. He also tells Victoria Winters again, he hates her. She wishes she'd die. This is everything you want to hear from a small child, right? No, it isn't. It asks a question of who is Burke Devlin in a much different way. And what I mean by that is, so sorry for the tangent there. You have Burke Devlin lying for David Collins. Now, it is really easy to sit here and say, well, he's just wanting a spy in the house. I think if that would have been the case here, then is not as smart as he thinks he is. And you could sort of see what Burke has already somewhat peeked into the soul of David to a degree. When he found the bleeder valve in his room, and underneath the cushion, it was disgust. It was a sort of I can't believe this kid. He was disgusted by the fact that the kid put the valve in there. He was a little mad. But then when Burke's by the window in his room, not in this episode, but an episode ago, in a previous episode, you have a very interesting situation where Burke is thinking, my God, this kid tried to kill his father. What is it really that bad up there? What's going on with this kid that he wants to kill his own dad? Even Burke doesn't want to kill Roger. I mean, come on. And I mean, this episode is also proof of that too. If not just the bleeder valve, but Burke doesn't want Roger dead. Burke wants Roger to pay for what he did. There's a difference between cold-blooded revenge and seeking justice. Seeking justice meaning getting the person behind bars, or what we're going to come to find out is just flat out revealing the truth of the situation. Episode 31 does a really good job of peeking into somewhat the soul of Burke Devlin. Burke does feel sorry for David, but he also knows that David is a bit psychotic. He also knows that David is very dangerous. And instead of Burke treats David very differently than what anyone else treats him. Burke is aware of how dangerous David is. But he also knows that David is only as dangerous as you make him. And I think this episode is a really good sentiment of that. And what I mean by that is Victoria wants David to be honest and forthright. And here's the thing, I don't disagree with her, but she's also lied herself, too. Victoria is still a great character, but it, again, where Victoria is battling on several fronts of talking to Roger, letting Roger know what she's doing with David, trying to get Roger to sort of extend his hand across the aisle. It's easy to see how quick Burke extends his hand across the aisle to David, because Burke sees a lot of himself within David. No, he didn't want to try to kill his dad, but he can see, why David is so scared, because remember, though Burke didn't live in Collinwood, he's been in Collinwood as a kid himself, playing playing with Roger, obviously, because him and Roger were best friends at one point. So he understands David to a degree. He gets him. He doesn't want him to spy on the family, or he's not recruiting him for that sense. He's more just wanting an honest-to-goodness friend. And he can see, most importantly, what Burke can see is he can see David really needs one. And the thing about kids, too, something this episode gets into, too, all over again, with the other episodes that it already got into, it re-gets into the trust factor with kids. Speaking as a dad myself, the one thing you want to do with kids is be honest with them and truthful, and earn their trust, but you also want them to earn yours. Again, I love my kids, but the one thing I tell them to do is do not ever lie to me and your mother. And that's something we've always stressed. Like, always tell the truth no matter what, because honesty is the best policy. And that's the thing. Once you instill that into your kids and get them to see, okay, lying doesn't get you anywhere, lying only gets you in further trouble, to let them, that you punish them to know that, hey, there's a consequence for this action of lying. And you do get that sense with David that David lied. What's David's punishment? Now, we don't see what David's being yelled at. That's nothing new, though. Roger's always yelled at David, and he yells him even further here, and rightfully so. But what's David's ultimate punishment? Does David go to jail? No. David is basically allowed to roam free and do whatever he wants. There's no consequence for his ultimate action. But there's a the next episode is even more telling. And I don't want to get into the spoiler of that episode, but with this episode, because you see, Roger yelling at David in the drawing room and confronting David about the bleeder valve, and Burke comes in this episode and he says, I found a bleeder valve. And they concoct this story that it was found on the road. And when Roger tells, okay, Burke, take David out the drawing room, and Roger and Victoria are in the drawing room, the doors are closed, Roger says, look at this valve. Is this the valve you found in my son's room? Are you sure it was the valve? Yes, I'm sure. And he does ask Victoria, do you believe that story? She goes, I don't know. Again, here's what I like most about Victoria, because it's a very human trait. She can't disagree with a story that she wasn't there for. You know what I mean? She can't. She wasn't in town. She didn't walk up. She didn't drive in that car with Burke Devlin. It's the same thing with the whole seeing him at Roger's car. I've only seen so much. I can't definitively say he removed that bleeder valve. And now we all know he didn't, and Vicky knows he didn't. and Vicky began to suspect David sooner than what anybody else actually did. Again, this is not a character that's dumbed down, but now she has to get back to the reality of, okay, David did something really wrong. What Vicky is hoping for is, okay, between Liz and Roger, she's hoping for some sort of punishment. Not necessarily sending the kid to prison, but definitely there needs to be some consequences for his actions. There's not. So, and something Burke says too, well, David, you think they believe my story? He goes, I don't know. And he goes, why'd you lie? He goes, oh, I don't know. He goes, I wasn't even sure what I was going to do with it. And then boom. I do think that's a telling of Burke. Burke is a man of action and impulse, but he also is ready with a story in case he does do this. Again, I do think Burke sees a lot of himself in David. Look, I'm not here to start a debate who's David's dad. We all know who David's dad is. It's Burke Devlin. You didn't see that coming, did you? Did you? You probably did. So, that's just my opinion. I could be wrong. I do think that what you have here is a very good tense scenery between a lot of characters, between Burke, between David, and between Roger. There's no Liz in this episode. There's no. We have Mitch Ryan, Lewis Edmonds, David Hennessy, and Alexander Isles. You have 4 people in this episode, and 4 people sell the hell out of their characters in this episode. And, when David and Roger are alone in Vicky's room, it's just further yelling. And again, when I love this, my favorite scene in this is because Burke tells David, hey, if you ever need a friend, you've got one, in him. But there's only so much Burke can do as David's friend. And by the way, it shows in this very episode when David runs away from his father. Burke, he's going to send me away. He's going to send me away. He goes, I'm sorry, David. There's only so much I can do. And I can't really interfere between you and your dad. And he can't. As much as he would want to, he can't have that sort of interference. And what Victoria Winters says to him, she goes, you find this all amusing. And I do see Vicky's point here. It's like, this isn't a game. And what Vicky's basically telling Burke without so much saying is, you're playing a game, and you're playing a very dangerous game. And you playing games isn't necessarily healthy for anybody, let alone David. She doesn't say those exact words, but that's in a sense what she's implying, and I gotta agree with her. I'm not sitting here saying Burke is falsely being David's friend. Not at all. But I think him playing the game of, I found the bleeder valve and thinking there was going to be no consequence for David was just dumb. Was just foolish. Well, not dumb on his part, but again, because David isn't mad at Burke. Who's David mad at? Victoria Winters. It's a fun episode to go and watch, and so are all of the Third Shadows episodes. Again, David says in this episode, I'm gonna get even. I'm gonna get even with her. He tells Vicky, I hate you. That girl. Run, Victoria, run. She doesn't, though. She doesn't run away. Oh, my God. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode review. It's a really, really fun episode. Go check it out on Tubi, episode 31. I'll see you guys later.